Thank you. Sorry.
All righty then. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Santa Rita's Union School District Board Workshop on June 15, 2024. I hereby call to order this meeting at what, 9? Look at my watch here.
9:47.
9:46 a.m. Thank you, everybody. Can I ask for a roll call vote, please?
Ms. Alvariano,
Present.
Ms. Sarah Turner,
Present.
Mr. Jacob Sandoval,
Present.
Mr. Neil Patel,
Aye, Captain.
Ms. Cindy Lopez,
Yep.
all members present.
Okay. Our time for our Pledge of Allegiance. Cindy, could you lead us on this one for today? Thank you. I'd appreciate it.
Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Cindy. I really appreciate that. That was nice. 1.3, approval of board agenda. Not like we have a lot on our.
I motion to approve the agenda.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, aye.
Motion 5-0.
Prior to us beginning, here we go for public input. 2.1, public comment on non-agenda items. Do we have any comments?
We do not have any public comments.
Very much. 2.2, public comment of agendized items. Do we have any?
No
comments?
public comments.
Thank you. I'm going to move forward with 3.1. Workshop, district strategic action plan and goals. Information item.
Well, in front of you, you have a couple of big placemats, and it's that time of year. So the first one that's a single page, I kind of wanted to give you a look back to when this board first created our 3-year action plan in June of 2021. So here we are in June 2024. Just to give us each year, we've sat together in the summer, we've reviewed it, we've checked in on progress where we're at, and then what do we need to flesh out more? So just gives you sort of a look back over time of what we've managed to accomplish and work on. And you can kind of see when you flip it over that it appears each year we've gotten just a bit more comprehensive, just when you look at how additional bullet points and those things. So one of the things, because Becky and Summer have spent a lot of time going through the new LCAP requirements and what we need to be doing for our students. And what I want the board to know is that quite a lot of our actions that we had in our 3-year plan align to what we need to do for our students in this new LCAP requirement. And so, when you look at what we've placed in for year 4, we've broken it up to match those areas of the LCAP to be a little bit more transparent and easy for people to understand and see the alignment and things. And so in looking at that, you'll see the carryover or of things like, of course, ensuring that our students, show growth in those areas. That's a requirement, right? That's one of our metrics for LCAP and those pieces. And so wanted to give you the look back, and then we're going to do our look forward. And so I want to give you a little bit of time to kind of look through that. In looking back at our year that we just finished, some things are falling off of this because they are completed. So Gear Up, the cycle of Gear Up has completed across our middle school. And so continuing to then establish other programs and things that support our students. You'll see a new deeper level of AVID. Krisha and Becky are taking our elementary team as well as middle school down for the AVID training and to look to bring our AVID program down to our elementary schools. And so getting that established while we have AVID at each of our middle schools, it's kind of a pre-implementation phase for elementary. I don't know if you want to talk about that and who you're taking a little bit.
So Krisha is helping us to do all of the organization because Krisha is an expert in AVID, and this is going to be my first training in AVID, so I'm really excited about it. But we are bringing almost all of our site admin and coaches to the AVID conference as part of our annual admin retreat before the school year starts, so that we can look at building up a stronger AVID base in middle schools and really infusing that school-wide instead of as an elective only course, and then start to infuse that into elementary as well, because there are elementary AVID models so that we can become a district AVID district is the way to say that. Sorry. Do you want to add anything, Krisha? Okay.
So, and while you'll see some carried over for 24-25, what we're doing with them is now next level. So instead of beginning something, we're refining something, we're continuing to go deeper on it. So like our PLC Plus, we did our training schedule, we got people, the base knowledge that they needed. So that's now shifted to we're supporting cycles for continuous improvement, right? Using that model. So we spent a lot of time this year sort of establishing the foundation of some things. And then, so for 24-25, those pieces then become the refinement and the tweaking of those processes. Becky has spent a lot of work behind the scenes this spring doing scope and sequencing for our instructional pieces with teachers from different grade levels coming together and building out sort of a roadmap. And so if you're a brand new teacher, your team is able to hand you the roadmap for your curriculum and say, this is what we've laid out. Here's how we've identified our standards and what we're going to do with it. That way they're better able to support each other It's not a situation where anyone expects you to be finishing someone's sentence in the next room. It's got the freedom to be an education professional, but it makes sure that we're all doing the same standards, that we're able to then gauge our students on a benchmark and a diagnostic in those pieces throughout the year together. I should have let you say that.
It's okay. It's in our presentation, so we'll get there.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
we'll
was
talk more
like,
about
I
it and
just
have
said
some
that, and
examples.
you're the one that was actually doing it. Yeah. And so with Becky moving over to take on ed services full-time, because we've been kind of splitting that part-time. And doing a lot of that foundational work that will lead into this coming school year. So looking forward to seeing some good new next steps and stronger things going on. Questions or comments that you have as you read through those?
I know you said the presentation along the way. Is that going to kind of?
Well, we have these we're going through, and then we've got our PowerPoint that will go through some of the LCAP alignment and those pieces at a deeper level with the student data.
Just something I noticed going back from year one to now, on the back side, as a board, we just recently this week talked about we need to refine a calendar of our practices, that's something that we haven't accomplished from our own internal goals. And so just us working with cabinet to start calendaring things out now, so that because our time together is so limited. And then our own work to the board member onboarding plan. Cindy's been amazing about chasing around after self-education, but that was the opposite of what we wanted to happen. We wanted to start not making everybody go through what we went through, which was on the job training. So just those are two things that I sort of noticed for our internal goals. And then just a request that I had, because thinking about parent communications, I know I don't get everything that the parents get, but even if it's something that's targeted to the Spanish speaking or Mixteco speaking community, I think we should also be sending out English versions of whatever it is, because the person in their house who's a reader might be somebody who's better at reading English. And it's just something that I've noticed sometimes where I'm like, what if their best reader is like a third grader who is just learning, so that even though it's information that is related to something that's going to be presented in Spanish or presented in Mixteco, that they have the opportunity of somebody having access to read that in English if necessary.
And on Parent Square, it sends it out in the correspondence language that they've picked. So we don't select that. So I put both on there. But
Okay.
if the parent has selected whatever their correspondence language is, it automatically sends it to them in that language.
Okay.
So-
I get stuff in Spanish only sometimes.
You must be only marked as, there's something that's marked as Spanish. So I'll have Yenny look at that, because it always goes in all
Yeah.
languages. So I do it in all languages on there, and
Yeah.
then whatever. And we had it similarly because the migrant team was only getting in English and they wanted it in Spanish. So
Yeah,
they
no,
print it out. So I'll have Yenny check but it's within Parent Square. It's based
Okay.
on correspondence language checked at enrollment.
So they only get one option as far as only one language is kind of what you're saying?
For Parent Square, when they register in Parent Square, it says primary language. And we actually I've had some with parents where I've had to go back in and talk to them because they're only getting in English. And so they'll call and say, oh, I'm only getting this in English. Can you send it to me in Spanish? But because a lot of our families, when they enroll, they just mark English on everything because that's what they think is best. So not realizing how the impact is. So then Yenny can go back in and switch they can put the other pieces as English and put correspondence to Spanish.
So back to what she was mentioning though. So is it possible to have two languages within the software? I'm not sure if it's even an
Not for
option.
Parent Square.
Not for Parents.
No.
Okay.
But that's why I try to
Okay.
post everything in both places. So I do send it out in Parent Square, and then I post it on our social media pages as well. And then in social media, I post both. That's on there. So,
Yeah.
but I
just
can double check.
what I've been specifically noticing is like I'm getting a picture of a flyer
Mhm.
and I'm only getting the flyer in Spanish,
through Parent Square.
Parent Square.
So because so I put it in the English one, and then I have to go to another tab for Spanish, and then I put
Okay.
in Spanish, and then you get whatever the correspondence. So for some reason you're checked in Spanish.
I can read it in Spanish.
Good
but
job.
I was trying to have access.
Yeah, we'll let you know. No, it's both. They comes in both. So
Mhm.
yeah, we'll make sure.
And then with our addressing, chronic absentees, we're doing the letters, the attendance incentives of sending like congratulations, all that. But I know we had talked about implementing like the system also when it came down to like being able to target those more, if I remember correctly. How is that? Like, is that already spaced out in the works, all of that?
I'll tell
can you guys
Joseph,
talk
and then you
to-
can tell
Oh,
A2A.
yeah.
So our district social worker specifically case manages for attendance. So he has a running list that I provide to him out of our data system of students who are at risk of being chronically absent. And so then he specifically works with those families to support in the areas. It's funny because we were talking about it while you guys were on your walk around chronic absenteeism. And often it's a much bigger picture than students just coming to school, right? Chronic absenteeism is related to health and mental health. Chronic absenteeism is related to connectedness at school. And so a lot of our work around that has been with our district social worker, really getting to the root cause of it and then supporting in those areas. So that may be helping that student to build a meaningful connection with a teacher, right? That may be addressing a health issue. So yes, that's in place. And his primary focus as the district social worker is around absenteeism and then supporting our foster and homeless youth. So, yeah.
So for the last few years, we've used the program A2A, and we've seen a huge gain in or I shouldn't say gain, a lowering of our chronic absenteeism rate, or a gain in our ADA. So our average daily attendance, that's where you say it's a gain, right? Which lowers the other. And that's our system that allows for like pulling the data, identifying students who are getting close to receiving that truancy letter, right? Because our goal is always to try to get with the family, make sure, first of all, that they understand the importance of coming to school as well as the impact of not attending school, right? And so then when our school sites, they also receive that information regularly, those reports. Before we brought in that system, people were having to try to calculate that by hand, trying to determine who gets a letter, that relates to the DA process at a certain point. Some things were falling by the wayside. People were saying, oh, I never got a call. So that system has allowed for real streamlining and access to the information that our administrators need, our school site secretaries, our attendance clerks. And now that we've got our district social worker being able to look and maybe identify some of those outlying reasons and impacts of why a student is starting to be truant, or because it does track truancy as well, like just our tardies, I mean. So like when you're getting all of that. So we look at that too, because if they're tardy every day for a first period, right? Is that getting to school? Is that a parent thing? Is that, how can we help? So that's going to always be a goal for us. So
the only other thing I would just add in addition is we just have done ongoing training this school year with principals, with the clerks around holding those conferences, like Summer mentioned, right? Getting in front of it, right? Looking at what students were really struggling with coming to school last school year, and then the first day of school, starting those conversations and having them be really meaningful and figuring out what the barriers to coming to school are. Right. So those conferences have been just game changing at each school site, right? Bringing in and having those meaningful conversations as we're having those, right? Trying to get them to come to school.
Melanie sparked me too. The other thing that we've talked a lot about is, and we were talking to Sarah about it, is attendance is challenging because especially for the littles, a lot of times we're talking about a parent, right? And challenges within the home. And so when we talk about incentives, I'm always like, right? Because if my mom's struggling to get me up and I'm not getting to school in time, and then I'm not getting the reward, it's challenging for those students, and it makes school not feel as safe because there's already challenges at home. Now, I'm being in a little student's mind, right? Being punished for the fact that my parent is having these challenges. And so we've really talked a lot with the sites around like, how do we incentivize it in a way that also recognizes every student's reality? And so, you know, I'm not a huge fan of like perfect attendance award ceremony because it publicly says, sorry, Sarah, we were talking about it. So Sarah couldn't get to school today. Well, Sarah's reason for not getting to school could have absolutely nothing to do with Sarah. And so that's why, like Melanie shared, the postcards that go home are also really a reinforcement for a parent to say like, hey, good job, you're doing it, or hey. And so I was just talking to a couple of the sites around how we incentivize attendance without also making it a punitive measure. So we're going to continue to work on that.
Yeah, you can kind of see that, especially it could cause conflict within the family home because you're saying like, hey, mom, just because of you, now I'm not
Yeah.
getting this.
Right.
And obviously there's already struggles there, and that makes it a little bit more complex. Yeah.
And our community liaisons do a lot of legwork too, along with the social worker. And so connecting and reaching out and doing the individual contacts.
You know, just a couple of comments. I'm really appreciative of the fact that this district over the years have continued to grow in terms of our various focuses to deal with the challenges we have in our district. You know, when I first started, I always thought, oh, simple solutions, keep it simple. But the truth is over the years, I've learned the hard way that education is complex. And we deal with a host of issues, not just education or academics. And when I'm going through here, and you are correct, we've increased our goals over the years, and so is our focus, our strategic goals. But what I'm seeing here is everything I didn't see when I started. So I'm seeing PLC, I'm seeing enrichment opportunities, multilingual support, family resource centers, bringing in our community. I'm seeing social emotional support, mental support, SEL support, crisis response, updating technology, bringing in a AVID program. I mean, I think I mentioned, I don't know, maybe 5-6 years ago, the more comprehensive, the better. You know, anything that we can bring in to support our students, you know, and our community. So, yes, it's getting a little complex. Having said that, you know, I do appreciate that we're targeting specific groups within our community that haven't been supported in the past to the degree they should have been. So I just want to say thank you, and I look forward to the rest of this presentation.
Yeah. No.
I also noticed when I was comparing year 1 to year 3, how many things in year 1 was us putting out fires, you know, and I'm like, oh, I forgot we used to have a problem about X because it got solved. So just kudos and thank you, because I remember being where we were sort of climbing out of this got left by the wayside, that got left by the wayside. And then, you know, I'm grateful to not be there anymore.
Yeah, no, I was going to mention there is a lot of more programs in place that help us, like with the attendance. I remember before when I first started on the board, they would do it by hand. So there's a lot more programs, especially tracking with data, you know, our facilities. Now we have a long-term plan. I think it is now tweaking things a bit, because obviously we implemented and then we see there's maybe little shortfalls or little things that kind of change. One of the things we wanted and we started seeing is social media. So we had conversations with Melissa's how sometimes it's how well they're doing in school, but also how they're feeling coming to our school, or how the parents feel being part of our district or whatever the case is. And I think that was the idea with social media. It's like they see all the exciting things. And when I talk to parents, because I do real estate and they're talking about which school district to go to, I'm always like, come to our school district, you know? You know, and a lot of times what they used to say was like, well, I don't really see much stuff online that you guys are offering. I was like, no, we're offering it. Like you'll see it. And so that's what I started realizing, because that's what happens in my business, is sometimes how people feel. So I do appreciate a facilities plan. The only thing that I don't know how we could potentially reword it on here. So like where it talks about, quick.
Facilities,
Yeah, regarding the facilities.
ensure,
Huh?
is that the one that says ensure the facilities?
Yeah, meets the district needs. Yeah. So the other component that I started realizing a little bit, I think it started when I we did the walk with the janitor, when I spent the whole kind of day with him and kind of analyzing stuff, is and that's kind of why I want the board to start walking through the school district, because it happens to me even with my business as we get busy. That's as we miss like the small details around us, because obviously we're this meeting or whatever the case is to be able to kind of the face of our school. So like when somebody walks into our school or walks in, and that's kind of why I mentioned the cupboards, because I always thought to myself, if I was a school board member and I was trying to recruit a family to come to our district and they walk through there, they're going to look at that and they're going to be like, wait, how long has that been there? Right. And so it already gives it an impression that's not correct just because of how they feel or they interpreted why they were there. So I think what I'd like to see, and I'm not sure how we can word it, is more intentionality. The face of our district is, so I always walk by La Jolla and there are little things, sometimes I don't mention it because I'm like, I don't want to be picky about stuff, but a lot of parents walk to school from the apartments or from that area there. And constantly when you walk through there, there's weeds, and it's a little thing, but that's their walk to school. And sometimes like we talk about like home life and what's going on in the situation. If they're walking and they see like where they're going to school and their walk isn't feel like it's being taken care of, then they don't take care of it themselves, So our goal, if I can reword it, is how do we walk our school sites? And like today was great because it's like everybody's kind of mellow down and really kind of be visually see like, hey, what do we see that we're normally miss? Because obviously each of us has our busy day and going to our office, whatever the case, that somebody else might notice and say, hey, that's kind of, because when people walk into like, for example, my office, one of the things they like is like, oh, I feel home. I feel like I'm here and this is like a good place to be. At La Jolla only because that's my drive every morning. That's the part that I see. But like there's a tree that's really overgrown past the fence line, right? And it kind of goes back to I have these conversations with my brother about the city because there's a lot of areas where people walk, and if it's not taken care of, then you don't take care of it. So I always tell my brother, and he's working on it because obviously he has his own stuff going on. But that's kind of what if we can, with more intentionality this year, be. And I know there's a plan, and I appreciate like the plan that we have. And I think it's one of those things that you mentioned. It's like just tweaking a little bit. It's like,
To me, that sounds like another bullet point related to like, there's a better way to say it, but my mind is like the curb appeal, right?
There you go,
There's a-
curb appeal. There we
Right?
go.
There's a better way to say it for a
Yeah.
school, I think.
Yeah.
I'm just not there yet. But it's also like maintaining the facilities as well, not just the growth of it, but more like grounds, facilities,
Upkeep.
yeah.
And if
Beautification.
you remember, it was part of our safety. So when we had those initial assessments where they came out and evaluated all of our campuses, that's one of the areas they focus on, and very similar for the reasons you said, right? If a school is well maintained, if there's not overgrowth, you're less likely to have crime. Right? That's just the reality. And so that was part of those comprehensive reports that we had as well as one of those areas. So we can
So
go under
like
that as well.
grounds upkeep or grounds maintenance also, right? Because that's sort of what you have now, not just what you're going to bring in.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing too, I mean, it's happened a couple times and it's something small, but I think it's like, like the sign that I
Mhm.
mentioned was down and it's like in front of the facilities building. I'm like, oh, I just need my brother to call and be like, bro, it's a sign of the facility. The
Yeah.
sign's take it down, So I think part of it is, if it's on Victor's department, have somebody that he says, hey, you know what, once a month or however schedule it is on a timeline, because that's what we want to do is walk to schools, where it's like, let's drive through the school and not be rushed. It might have to be on a weekend because we're always rushed as it is. So that's kind of, I think, the part that I would like to see for the following year.
Yeah.
Is kind of make it a goal. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jacob, that you are so right in identifying that, because when the preschool over here, of course, it's no longer
Yeah.
going to be there anymore. But I remember I had brought up the subject of when I took my kids,
Yeah.
the little ones, to the preschool. I walked in and I'm like, oh, I didn't even walk in. I walked through and it's just a short little area and it was full of weeds. I think I sent you a picture of it. And that is the first thing you see, is I think you mentioned the beautification of the school.
Mhm.
And I think it's really important that parents,
Mhm.
yeah. And I think the answer that I got at the time was that we were short of,
Yeah, we were short-staffed at that
When we
time.
did that, yeah.
I remember that.
yeah, we were short-staffed. But I mean, if I noticed it, I know the
Mhm.
parents notice it. And then not only that, but the kids, they don't take pride in something like that.
Mhm.
But if it was cleaned up
Mhm,
and I know that they were planting stuff,
mhm.
so they would take more pride in their work. But yeah, you are right.
No,
Thank you for bringing that up.
very interesting what you said, the high school I teach at, when I started teaching that offense all along, when safety. You know, but that created that image.
Mhm.
But then one of my principals came in, yeah, many years later, said, no, we're not a gym. Take it out.
Hmm.
People can't all, but just safety, no, safety is what you're projecting. And by doing this, you're projecting up freedom. So I agree with you. I think beautification, visual,
Mhm.
you know, it should be pleasant, it should be inviting, and it should be professional, you know?
Yes.
And like, you know, my dad used to say, little paint doesn't cost much, you know, a little weeding doesn't cost much. You know, in that total state. So,
Mhm.
I mean, I think.
Yes.
honestly, this. And then.
I was just going to add the other part that we're doing based on kind of that report and what we know is, I think they're working on in McKenna right now is adding some more mural work on the outside
Yeah.
because we know that that also both adds kind of an aesthetic and students are less likely to vandalize spaces that they've created. And so right now at McKinnon, they're working on, we've got in partnership with a grant. Anyway, doesn't matter, but they're working on a mural right now that'll be on that outside part that faces the street so that as people are coming down, you know, they're going to see that mural on the backside of McKinnon. And so that's been one of our goals as well. That maybe falls into that
Yeah.
is adding some more of this mural work. I mean, think about when you drive into East Salinas, like I go under that bridge and like it changes my whole kind of perspective as I enter that space, right? They have the beautiful mural. I come in and it changes the way that I feel in my day. And so I think that's another good point that we can add. I mean, with that, we can
Yeah.
add the mural
So
work.
we've got like grounds, upkeep, maintenance, beautification
Mhm.
would be a key word. in
Yeah,
that
and
role.
I would add to that, because this is sort of a little bit outside of our scope of
Mhm.
work, walking the sidewalks that don't belong to us outside of the schools or the major paths that people are taking, just in terms of what do we notice? I mean,
Mhm.
Melissa knows because I do call her when
Mhm.
when things go bad in the sidewalk outside of Santa Rita, which is not technically ours, but I'll call and say, hey, can we go deal with that? Because I don't want the parents or the students, even though I know we didn't create the mess, but we're cleaning it up anyway, because I want it a better situation for the students in terms of what they
Well, it's
see.
their route to school, right? And so if there's a shopping cart that's been there for a month and half in the ditch, that
This is a call that I've made.
might be an example of, I mean, it sets a message about the community that they're having to walk to. So like going and doing something like that, it makes sense for us to, those are our kids, right? And they're having to walk by that. So, or making a call if they're walking by something that seems dangerous. We've had to do that before, right? Where a parent calls and said, this is happening. I know it's not on the school, but like kids are walking by it. So if we have to reach out to law enforcement or to the city and be like, can we do something about this? Because our students, our littles are walking past that. So we've had to do that too.
If I can just add a little bit, we do have a funding for it to maintain our schools that all of the districts are required to have. It comes out of the unrestricted funding. Is a 3% minimum transfer that we have to do out of the LCFF just for maintenance of the facilities. So that's something that it's not gonna cost huge dollars, and it's not something that we need to reduce as we go into reductions in the next year because it is a
Right. Mhm.
requirement by Ed Code. Just want to
Thank you.
mention that.
No, good point. Yeah. So we got like, that's a kind of thing, like we can bring that back for discussion for our upcoming meeting, be like, here's our goal for that. And then we can just add it and do that. Other things, anything else on this?
I
Yes.
I have one. Under student discipline, I just want to know. We were looking at maybe like a Baldwin school. How is that coming along?
So that would be a community day school. We could not operate a community day school on our own. Fiscally, it wouldn't make sense. I think I shared, I worked with CDE to kind of talk through like, is there a possibility of doing that in partnership with another school district? and just to be clear, like I want to, because community schools have come out, a community day school and a community school are two different things. A community day school is really an alternative school. And so at this time right now, we're really looking at how do we put preventative measures in place so that we don't need to kind of get to that space, because fiscally we couldn't do it on our own. We would need to do it in partnership with a partnering school district who right now in my work with them are also trying to figure that out. So I think it's something that, you know, eventually maybe something we can do in partnership with somebody. Right now we're really trying to focus in on putting the preventative measures in place to support students' needs so that we don't have to use more exclusionary methods.
Thank you.
And one of the things that I want to, at the very bottom of that first page, the overarching theme of multilingual learners, right? So I know we have the goal of like establishing a dual language program, but that goes in tandem with also supporting multilingual learners. And so like my first master's is in teaching English as a second language, right? We've all taught English learners, the teachers in the room. And so that native language support, that first language support as we're going on, some of our students, their first and second language support as they're learning English as a third, and those pieces. And so part of that background will help frame out as we move forward with pursuing dual language. And of course, Rosa's going to be like, we're going to have to go slow. The funding is starting to get smaller, so we have to be very purposeful about it. But our first step, obviously, is welcoming our new teacher who's coming in, because part of that process is establishing small steps along the way for CDE to give you the blessing to move forward with the programming piece. And so getting our visiting teacher established over at Santa Rita Elementary with a TK program. We're ordering the curriculum that she'll need for her students. And we'll have to introduce her to our other Miss Toy because she'll also be a Miss Toy who's a TK teacher. So that should be a fun partnership for the two of them.
So, well, for clarification,
Mhm.
what's the timeline you see in terms of from this point to getting at least one of our schools designated?
Yeah.
I can answer. What I would say is I'm not comfortable with us setting a timeline. It's so dependent on getting the right people. And again, I think I've shared, I've worked I started as a bilingual teacher. That's what I did in my career. And then in migrant ed worked with lots of districts, and then my other consulting work worked with lots of districts. If you don't do it right, it's going to cause more harm than good. And so a big piece of that is getting the teachers in place. And so what I would say is when we are able to work with CDE, again, our partnering districts are getting the majority of their teachers from Spain. Most teachers who are here are coming from Spain. We're working really closely with Soledad at CDE. Almost all of Salinas City, King City is just starting to put their King City Unified, and she's starting with 2 classes, but most teachers are coming from Spain. That comes with its own challenges in that there's a big cultural difference between Spanish in Spain culturally, as well as Mexico. Mexico's program is shrinking, and the number of US teachers getting a multilingual credential is shrinking. So it's really about starting to recruit in a pool. So as we're looking at teachers who have bilingual credentials, really working to maintain them so that we have a strong pool of teachers that we can pull in to start looking at, can we do a program starting with TK and moving forward. The majority of programs that go quickly fail. And then you have kids in 4th grade who they're now ending their programming, and students have had 3 years of primary, because again, most dual language programs are doing a 90-10. So 90% Spanish that first year and moving forward. So, I mean, I think that if I looked at a trajectory, I think, you know, in a ball, I would say 5 years to have a quality program, dependent on what happens in terms of education. We have less people going into the teaching field altogether. And so, and in those programs, you're really utilizing 2 teachers, because you have a teacher who's the English teacher and you have a teacher who's the Spanish teacher. And so they don't cross. And so, you know, 5 years, I think, is a possibility, but I wouldn't put that on.
And just
any.
to add for the recruitment of Miss Toy, Soledad, who is the consultant we work with, the person we work with at CDE, recommended that if we want teachers from Mexico, we needed to go in person. So that was why Daisy and I went to Mexico City a few months ago.
So-
And I know it was great, but she said, we're going to prioritize placements for the districts who send someone in person
Yeah,
to do the interview. And we were given one person to interview, and luckily it worked out. Yeah.
The district I work in, we did try to hire teachers from, Europe, especially,
Mhm.
even off of I forgot what island it was, the Canary Islands. But we had that same issue and,
Yeah.
and the Spanish wasn't the same.
Yeah.
And students picked up on that right away. So, my concern is that I would like, we've already voiced our support for it,
Mhm.
but I'm also worried that given our population base and the considering needs that they have, that we do it the right way.
I agree. And I was just going to add in migrant ed right now. So one of the ways that teachers would come over here a lot before is in migrant ed. For many, many years, we had the visiting the teachers who came in the summer from Mexico, and that's a short-term assignment. Rosa and I have hosted them for many, many years. So teachers would come over from Mexico, spend the summer working in migrant ed specifically. That would give them kind of a leg in to start the visiting teacher program. That program is no longer available. So there are not binational teachers coming in the summer anymore because of contracting issues around short term. So my hesitation a little bit is like one of our pathways has also now ended. And so that makes me a little more concerned about how many teachers will get into the long-term pathway.
Thank you so much.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Melissa. You brought that up because I had marked it down and I completely got sidetracked. It was something I wanted to bring up because I think it's very important and I want to emphasize on what the district has done to go, like you said, you guys went to Mexico to get that. It's totally different. Even in Mexico, the Spanish
Dialects.
we speak here, it's not a proper Spanish. I thought I'm fluent. And when I started taking, Spanish in college, I was like, wait a minute, what is this, So it's a whole different thing, Spain, how they're going. So I think it's really important for our parents to know that the district is doing everything that we can. And I love that you said, Summer, we can't put a time frame on it because we want this to work. We know that the need is here in this district.
Yeah.
Truly. And so thank you for that. Thank you for bringing that up because I was like, we're going to talk about this and I completely got sidetracked with the whole beautification. So thank you on that. But that is something that we should be very proud of in our district.
But
And-
also the board supporting our expanding work with Centro, right? And seeing that like really blossom this past school year and then continuing that partnership with them next year. I mean, they're assisting in so many ways, particularly at Santa Rita Elementary after school, making those connections for our multilingual learners, even in the after school setting, getting them that support and just continuing to grow that partnership also. So.
And I'm going to add the last thing because we have so much to go
Okay,
through. But I
awesome.
wanted to say that one of the reasons that we chose to place this teacher in TK doing primary language is that we know that those TK students curriculum wise are really going to get a lot of the same materials when they go into kindergarten, right? So by giving them primary language TK, we're really building a foundation for learning and they're going to be stronger when they move into kindergarten, which will be in English. So versus they're coming into the school system for the first time, they're monolingual Spanish speaker, everything's in English. Their affective filter kind of shuts down and their learning slows. But by providing them that opportunity for primary language support in kindergarten, we're going to set a foundation for the English learning they're going to do in TK, that we're going to set a foundation for that English learning in kinder. So even if for only a few years, what we have is that opportunity, build that for our students right off the bat, that first experience is really positive. It builds a strong language foundation in the primary language. Our students are going to do better overall in the end.
Maybe a little off topic, but since we're here, Sarah and Elva, I wanted to ask you a question as primary school teachers. I've always wondered about this idea of teachers moving with the grades. I've heard positive things and sometimes negative things, but the idea is that the class will keep the same teacher. they would go from, second and third, or maybe fourth and fifth. I mean, is there any benefits? Is that
The
something?
research says that it's beneficial. That looping is what they would
Yeah.
refer to it as, basically because you don't, what I was gonna say sort of the negative. You don't lose all the relationships. You don't have to regain, where is this child? What do they need? How do I make it work? As someone, I looped with my students from kinder to first grade, and that was just because they needed me to move, not because I requested it. And it was one of the easiest years I ever had in terms of I had no discipline problems. They knew all the procedures. Like we could fly with them. You need to have somebody who loops opposite to you. In other words, if you're going to be like a first, second teacher, you need somebody who's looping opposite to you. That's the only thing that's challenging about it, in my opinion.
Exactly what you just said at the end was why I was bringing it up, because, we're having these issues with emotional development, but, it's like the teachers finally settle the class down to learning, and then boom, they're gone, and a new set comes in. They invest all this time in getting to know their students and learning the peculiarities, learning their parents, finally establishing a relationship, and it's kind of lost after a few. So I'm wondering, is that something that we should look into? Maybe superintendent, we can talk about that. But to me, it's like, let's try to implement stuff that makes our teachers' jobs easier, at the same time helping our students develop with the same person they can trust and mentor over time. So first and second, or whatever it is, second and third, build fourth and fifth, build that relationship where, and I think like I said, for teachers in particular, for me as well, it takes a long time to get to know a class set of students and their needs. And for me to lose them and redo that year after year after year, it seemed like a waste of time and resources. So I'm not sure if it's feasible in the high school level, but I know it's been done in the elementary. So I just thought I'd bring that out, Cindy and Jacob.
I taught third and I looped with my kids to fourth. Now they put me in third because they were trying to get teachers in every grade level to have a B-clad. So I had my B-clad. So they put me in third. I didn't want to go to third, but I'm glad I did. So when I got to third, the kids there were supposed to have already pretty much gotten a good base of English, which they didn't. So I was put there. And so I developed such a good rapport with these kids. And I worked so hard at getting them to where they're supposed to be. I asked my principal, can I loop with them? He said no. So I had to really fight and really sit down and show the research, of how beneficial it is. So as a result, I did loop with my fourth graders to fourth grade. And I'll tell you, it was the best experience ever. Even the ones that I had a lot of discipline issues, by the time they left me at fourth grade, they were fine. And I checked in on them in fifth grade, and the discipline still there, but not as severe as their. Personally, I think it's a great thing. And you just have to have a teacher who buys into it. That's another thing. Big thing.
Is that something that we can explore, or is that something that talk about the future? I'm just trying to think of creative ways that have worked in the past and have proven to work, to help deal with a bunch of situations.
I was just gonna add, I mean, I'm not an educator besides the rest of the board, me and
But you
Jacob
are
are
an
not.
educator.
Your mom. The mom, right? In that aspect. But I didn't even know that this actually existed. My husband would always talk about he had an experience with, I believe it was his third grade teacher. And I think she went all the way to fifth grade with them. And it was the class though, like the whole class moved with them. And I was like, you're lying. Like, I just never believed that was true. Right. And he was like, no, babe. And he talks about it so positive till this day. So, I mean, now hearing it, when I get out and be like, oh, I guess you were telling me the truth. I believe you now. I believe you. But the thing that I'm saying is like how Alva's saying, like, what if this is just like right now that this was just me thinking, what if like, oh, okay, an elementary teacher, when you get credentialed elementary, you could teach every grade, correct?
Mhm.
Okay. So saying that, your credential, you could teach every year, would the teacher be up to it, right? First, that's very important. Would the teacher be up to it? But wouldn't it be nice, like, let's say, okay, teacher, you're starting first grade, and hopefully these children stay in our district throughout the course of elementary. Every year they move up, and then comes fifth grade, you start again. First grade, it's a whole new set of kids, and they're moving forward. That would be, I mean, I don't know if that would work or not. I mean, I think it has a lot of involvement, but right now hearing you guys, I was just thinking about like, that would actually be if.
Elva and Sarah will probably agree. A lot of times when you do looping, you'll have a teacher who will do primary grades. So like K1, 2, and then they'll move to a new teacher for 3, 4, 5. Just simply because as an educator, a lot of times you gravitate towards like a grade level cohort. So like somebody who's been teaching 5th grade for like 10 years and you said, I want you to start looping with kindergartners. They might be like, oh, I know my credential says that, but and so because like Elvis said, you've got to have the teachers got to want
The
to-
friends that I've had, just what I've experienced is either K1, 1, 2, 2, 3, and I had someone who did it 5, 6 too, and again the experiences that I've had or observed 98% positive. Every once in a while, you'll get a family that really disliked a teacher for some reason, or so, and sometimes it'll be the principal and the teacher will have that discussion saying, you know what, how about we move that kid out because that family just really didn't like my teaching style. But I said, oh, in 27 years, I probably 98% of my experiences have been positive.
You also got.
Yeah. Yeah.
To me, that's a major selling.
Hmm.
I mean, if we could have a district where the teachers are dedicated, for the multi-year growth path, where you build that relationship. I don't know. For me, it seems like when they're that young, the idea of that building that trust and mentoring, and they build that bond with that teacher. I mean, what I see elementary teachers, their bond is different than what I see from high school. And it's just more close, personal, and it's based completely 100% on trust, that they develop. So it's, anyway, I don't mean to keep harping, but I would appreciate the district leadership coming back with some type of ideas.
Well, I can remind the board that our conversation last summer led us on the pathway of changing our middle school schedule and how we're doing 6th grade, where they're using more of a core model and they'll stay with that core teacher for their subjects this coming school year. So.
Thank you. Thank you, board members.
All right, so we're gonna move into this, and I know Mr. Patel, you're stepping out at a certain point, but so as we go, and if there are things that we want to revisit, like we'll bring that fleshed out goal about our grounds and beautification and general maintenance back for discussion at our upcoming June meeting, so that we can get it on the placemat, as it were. And so I'm gonna hand this part over to our team. For the most part, they've spent a lot of time putting this, and this feeds into a lot of the background data that went into that LCAP draft that you just saw.
I'm gonna start by just showing this word cloud that we pulled all the language out of the year 4 strategic action plan and put it into a word cloud format. And so of course, the words that are bigger are the ones that are used more frequently in that plan. Because there's such a correlation to this and the LCAP that we're working on, we wanted to bring that forward kind of as a foundation for what we're going to go over. Okay. All right, so looking at our LCAP goals is what we're going to spend some time doing this morning, and we're going to go really fast because
Yep.
we're, behind where we thought we would be, and that's fine. Good discussions. Right. We do have for each area, kind of a focus, question or two for you to think about. So as we're looking at our foundational skills here, our ELA and math, two essential questions that we would like you to think about and that we thought about as we were putting these plans together are how can we support educators in adopting instructional practices that meet ELA and math standards? And how can we measure and ensure continued growth in students meeting ELA and math standards and on the iReady benchmarks, which is our local data. So with those questions in mind, let me walk you through some of our data. We're going to look first at the state testing. And of course, this is 1 year behind. So the tests that our students just finished in May are not yet reported. So this is 1 year ago, 2023 data. So the left-hand side with the green is our English language arts data. And we can see that 29% of our students met or exceeded standard in ELA. This is district-wide, not broken down by any grade level or school site. In mathematics, that is 17% met or exceeded. I showed this to some of our teachers who are participating on the scope and sequence work, and their faces looked like yours. Like it's shocking, right? So what I like to say is we have a lot of opportunity for growth. And we have some work going into that and plans to move forward and to increase our achievement levels. This is that same data for 2023, this time by ethnicity. Actually, this is it's longitudinal, excuse me. So when you look at the grade area on the left side, it tells you what year, the order of those years. And so this is 17-18 and then 18-19. You'll remember in 2020, we didn't have, the state testing didn't count. There was no dashboard. So that year skipped. And then we have 21-22. And then our most current is the last column on the far right, 22-23. And clearly our Hispanic and Latino population is definitely behind where the rest of our subgroups are, just based on where those columns are rising.
And remember, oh, sorry.
Mhm.
And remember on these, if anytime your data has 10 or fewer students, they won't publish the percentage because it feels like you'd be able to identify which students.
A lot of the drops are like post-COVID, it looks like too, right?
Mhm.
I mean, huge.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's a multiplier effect, you know, because it's like a rolling snowball, you know, and so it's not linear. That's the problem.
On this next slide, we're looking at a gap analysis. And so the columns are showing first our local data for 22-23. The middle is county data. And then the right column is state data when you're looking at the gray on the bottom and the green on top. And so this is now for our economically disadvantaged students. We can see that in 22-23, 25% of our students were met or exceeded standards. And then below that are students with disabilities, and we're looking at 5%. The box off to the right is talking about where they were 21-20, I'm sorry, to the left was 21-22. I'm going to use this pointer, right? Yes.
Again, what was the black line
got
and
it.
the green line?
So that's what I'm going to talk about next. So this black line is how our students did overall. And then the green line is our socioeconomically disadvantaged students. And so you can see that those lines are pretty close because we do have a high level of socioeconomically disadvantaged students in our district. They make up a majority of all, and so it's pretty close. Down here, this is all students, but this green line is our students with disabilities. And here's where you can see there's a pretty big gap in their achievement.
I just want to add, I think it's important when we're talking about students with disability, that's any student with an IEP. So we're not, if a student has a speech and language IEP only, they're still going to be classified under that category. So just kind of keeping in mind that it's not just looking at like special day class students or students receiving RSP. Any student who has an identified disability, on Melanie's case over there, right? Like who has an IEP qualifies under this category.
Do we keep track of how much IEPs our school district has?
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah, the state. Yeah.
Yes, and we report to the state.
Okay. How many do we have? Or do you know at least?
483 as of yesterday.
Oh,
Just a quick. Can you go back one slide, please?
Yeah.
But again, right, that 483, like Summer said, right, speech only, that's our resource students and our students in mod severe, right? And that, yeah. So, and then we refer to MCOE if our students need even more services. So that's not included in that number.
So going back to this data here, for me, I'm always looking for patterns, and delay. And what I'm seeing here, maybe I'm wrong, is that we're having stabilization last year with our white and Filipino and Asian group. And our Hispanic group is going down a little bit during that time period. And normally that's what I've seen in data in that socioeconomic group, that ethnicity group is usually lags behind as a trailer for the other group. So I'm just wondering, is it the case that we're just waiting as the other groups are moving up, they will also move up over time? Or is it specific acute problem with one specific?
I think that it has to do with that being where most of our English learners are, and our English learners will be looking at in a couple of minutes, but they're struggling as well. And so one of the things we did last year was implement a new ELD program for 4th through 8th grade. We're now expanding that. The curriculum expanded finally to K through 3. So we're going to expand that district-wide to have a stronger English language development program for students, and continuing to provide coaching and professional development on how to do English language development throughout the day in every subject. Every teacher in our district is required to have an English learner authorization to teach integrated ELD because we have such a high population of English learners. But not all teachers feel confident in their ability to infuse those strategies. So we're continuing to provide training and coaching on that.
I think it's important too, when you look at math, it's different, right? So if you look at math, Hispanic and Latino students actually stabilized. So they maintained at 15 the previous year, 15 again, %, still low, but right, that's a maintenance. But if you look at our white students, they went from 36 to 33. If you look at our Asian students, they went from 45 to 41. And if you look at our Black African-American students, they went from 28 to 24%. So in math, we actually saw stabilization in our Hispanic Latino students and decline in our other areas. If you look at ELA, for Hispanic Latino, a 1%, which would be considered maintained by state standards. We saw white students maintain. We saw Filipino students grow. That could also have to do with our population. But then we saw Asian students fall, and then we saw Black and African-American students rise, right? So overall, it's a mixed pattern. And so it makes it a little bit challenging. But what we know is, for example, in looking at this in math, like across the board, there's challenge.
Yes.
So I'm looking for stabilization. I'm looking for a floor. I'm looking for a base. Are we there yet? I think we are. I don't know, Sarah.
Not having it, one, no, but I don't think anybody in the state. Two, my opinion, just based on talking to teachers, the tests are still varying hugely from year to year, number of questions, how they're being tested. It's not apples to apples in terms of data. I think the data still matters.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of we could have done hugely better this year in terms of what we see in the classroom, and we may or may not see that represented on the test, because I had heard people talking about that the math test for some children was like 20 questions this year, and that's all that it was. And it
Hmm.
were you lucky enough to get a test that hit what your child, because some of the standards are obscure. So was it really important standards, or were they tested on something that maybe you never even got to because it was, so I'd be much more interested in looking at the iReady data than this.
Going there, we're going there.
Okay, let's keep going. Let's keep
Yeah.
going.
I just, when we do the state comparison, I hate CAST. I mean, you know that.
So this is the same data we just looked at for ELA, but this time it's for math for those same two subgroups. And again, very similar trend where the lines are real close together here for socioeconomically disadvantaged, and wide here for our SPED students. All right, and then looking at iReady, here are our spring results for this current year, 23-24, by school. I think that page is missing from our handout. Or do you have it? Is it there? Oh, never mind. I see it. Okay. Got it.
So the percentages that we're looking at, can you explain what those represent or what they mean?
Yes. So what we're looking at here, this is reading. And if we look at Santa Rita Elementary, we're looking at 19% of students at Santa Rita Elementary, all grades, are on or above grade level.
Got it.
43.63% are one grade level below, and 37.17 are two or more grade levels below.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. So that's for reading on this left side and for math here. I'm going to keep moving because another way to look at this, and I'm sorry, looks like it's a little bit off the page, but we can see the data. That's what matters. So again, looking at reading on this side and math here, we had overall as a district, 43.9 of our students, so about 44% of our students met typical growth. And what that means is they grew 1 year academically in 1 year's time. And so our goal would be that all students grew 1 year in 1 year's time. And then we would want students who are behind to make more than 1 year's growth in 1 year's time. We want to have them exceed that 1 year's growth to the stretch growth. And so the light blue, the stretch growth, is really what we're going to be focusing on in iReady this year with the professional development that's coming in. We do regular check-ins with our iReady consultants, and they'll go to the school sites, meet with teacher groups to talk about their data, how students are doing, and how they can increase students' performance, and making sure they're accessing the program and the curriculum enough. So this is by grade level. So kindergarten tends to be a grade level that's a little bit more hesitant to put the students on the Chromebook. So I'm going to work on pushing them a little bit more this year. Here's first grade all the way through 8th grade. And then the same thing for math here. And then I just wanted to briefly share the feedback from teachers about the professional development they received from iReady throughout the year this year. We will have more next year, particularly at Santa Rita Elementary, because they have additional identified needs. And then with middle school math teachers, they're going to have some additional professional development in math.
So we have our dashboard, which is federal state mandate, which we don't appreciate too much. So we have our internal iReady that. So what's the buy-in in terms of morale and support of staff? I mean, it's only as good as the buy-in, right?
Right.
So I'm not in the classroom. I don't know what the buy-in is in terms of staff and what the morale is around it. So I'd like to hear how well it's implemented and how well it's received.
I can
comments.
say that it varies. It varies by grade level, it varies by school. Every school and every ELA and math teacher in the district had opportunities this year for professional development with iReady. With the iReady consultants going to the schools, having substitutes cover classes so teachers in small groups could meet with them and really dig into their data and next steps. And this is the overall feedback. It was very positive. You can see that 9s and 10s are the highest column. And so I think that even the teachers who are a little bit less bought into it understand that this is a focus and that we are going to keep doing it. It's not going away. In the coming year, I'm excited that one of the professional development sessions we're having with our consultants is having them visit each school on one of our learning walk days and helping us identify what things we should look at in the classroom to see if it's being implemented to fidelity so that we can then continue to work with the teachers who maybe aren't reaching those targets. Mhm.
Because to me, I read it like a measuring stick, you know, thermometer, if you will. You know, it doesn't necessarily do instruction, it just tests on what instruction they.
Yeah,
think that
it actually does both.
But is it implemented in terms of class?
And so we can look, we have data that we looked at the end of the year, actually with all of our principals, where we could dig into grade levels by school site and see how much time students were using the iReady lessons for personalized instruction. And there are some goals that we want to hit and that we can see where those goals are being met and where they're not so that we can then put in some more reinforcement.
Yeah, I think fidelity.
Mhm.
Program is,
It's key. Yeah.
thank you very much.
Okay, so this I'm going to go through really quickly. This is our CAST, which is the science test, and only 5th and 8th grade are tested by the state in our district for CAST. And so we can see that in 2023 spring, we had, what is that? About 13%, 14% of students meet or exceed standards in science. So again, it's an area for us to improve for sure. Opportunity for growth. And these are the results by school. So you can see the met or exceeded here by school site. And again, these would only be 5th graders and 8th graders. And then this is across years, district-wide from 2019, 2022, and 2023. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the scope and sequence plans and show some samples of the work. And so this is our 3rd grade ELA scope and sequence plan. These are created by teachers who volunteered to use to come and do the work for some hourly pay. And I'm so grateful for the number of teachers who stepped up to do this work because I'm not an expert of every grade level and every subject. But we do have them in elementary for ELA and math. And then in middle school, we have them for ELA, math, science, and social studies. As our starting point, they're identifying the key standards that will be taught in each trimester or quarter. Attaching to those the adopted curriculum and what pieces of curriculum will be used to taught those focus standards. And then they made correlations with science and social studies so that where we can unite ELA and science and social studies, we can bring in those texts so that they're getting both the literature and informational text in the reading program, but also the science and social studies text and learn how to deal with that text as well in a meaningful way. And then this is our 8th grade math scope and sequence, again, identifying the key standards, which modules out of our Eureka Squared math will be used to teach those. And then also identifying for grades 3 and up where they can use the interim assessment blocks out of the SBAC system so that students have familiarity with how those tests work. And how those tests measure our standards as practice opportunities and opportunities for teachers to collaborate around how their students do and where they can beef up their instruction to help students achieve better.
So what are we looking as far as like when it says like NSA 1?
Those are the standards. So that would be number sense, standard A1 and A2.
Okay, that's what they can
Mhm.
refer to as a teacher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So these are based on the Common Core standards. There are so many standards that being able to teach everyone thoroughly is absolutely impossible. And so the teachers who did this work were identifying what are the most important standards that students need to know thoroughly in order to be successful in other subject areas in future grades. And then we looked at them as a team, both across grade levels, looking at what am I going to be teaching in ELA, math, science, social studies, but also vertically, I had the teachers sit in tables, kindergarten through grade 8, and look at the scope as it rises and falls to make sure that they're in alignment.
So essentially a teacher would pick this up and kind of know where they should be focusing on,
Yes.
as opposed to them just being like, how do I get to everything?
Where, yeah.
Yeah.
And when they meet with their grade level or subject area, if they're middle school PLC team, right, to be able to talk through this, how are students doing on this, and being able to kind of work together on how did you teach that maybe a little bit differently than I did if they're there, because you've got some continuity across your colleagues.
Outside of iReady, do you have common district assessments for the standards?
This is part of what they're working on
Yeah.
through this process. And so I had the development team identify some possibilities, but I told them they're not glued to them because as their PLC plus teams meet, when they're talking about what they're going to be teaching for the next 4 to 6 weeks, they can determine how are they going to assess to see that students have mastered that, determine what date they're going to do that assessment, and then be able to come together with their scores and talk about their successes or areas for improvement and what their next steps will be. It's a great first step. I'm really excited about it. You can see at the bottom, we kept a row for grade level notes for future versions because this really is our first year using these. And I told our teachers, these are not going to be perfect. Year 1 of anything is not perfect. We need to get a plan started. We need to try it and reflect along the way. And then we'll come back together in the spring to revise and make it better for next year. Okay. So our LCAP actions, I'm not going to read them all, but these are the actions within goal 1, which really addresses English language arts. Yep.
I just want to draw your attention to 1.6 to 1.9.
Yeah.
Again, if you remember that we talked about that the new requirement, we have to have specific actions related to those student groups in the red. So you'll notice in 1.6, there's a specific action related to homeless students, Hispanic students, low socioeconomic students, English learners, and all, which is a funny category for Santa Rita. And then you'll see that for Gavilan View has a specific, John Gutierrez has a specific, and La Jolla has a specific. Those are under those new requirements for LCAP to have those specific actions.
So now, like here, it's obviously more targeted for the school as far as how you're labeling it. I'm sure before you guys were able to see like, hey, Santa Rita needs this assistance, right? So besides what gets presented to the state, is there also a different approach the district is taking now that we have it this way?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's an approach and it's a funding,
Okay.
right? So more because where money goes,
Sure.
services flows, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's also really looking at how we allocate and, you'll see a little bit about that when Rosa does the budget piece, but some more services, which means more funding has been allocated.
Oh, got
to
it. So it
support
is more
those.
targeted
Mhm.
programming.
Absolutely.
Because
Yeah.
now it's like, we got to spend it specifically here. So now they're getting a little bit extra pie, which means a
Mhm.
little bit extra service.
Service and support,
Got it.
yep.
Okay.
Okay. And then this is goal 2, which is for math. And you'll see the same things with 2.6 through 2.9. Targeting specific students and schools. Okay.
Just to give you an idea, because I know we're focusing a lot on Santa Rita. Just to give you an example, Santa Rita enrollment for this closing year, because I'm working with multiple years, but this closing year in 23-24, their enrollment was 587. Out of those 587 students, 574 qualified for low income foster kid EL learner. So
Wow.
over 90% of the students.
Holy smoke.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And so our next look is at English and multilingual learners, really focusing on our EL population. Our goal is to empower our educators to support these students and enhance equitable learning opportunities for them. And these are our essential questions for this section. So what professional development opportunities are needed to empower educators in supporting multilingual students? This is what I was talking about earlier with our English learner population. And how can we track and increase the progress of English learner students towards English proficiency? And here we are. So to the far left is Daisy, our HR coordinator. And in the middle is Maestra Sofia Toy. We're so excited for her to come, and she joined our DLAC meeting. Was that last week or the week before? And got to meet some of our parents. It was great virtually. Yeah. So excited for her to get here next month.
She's from Oaxaca.
From Oaxaca. And she's, yeah, we'll have Maestra Toy and Miss Toy. No, she's not married.
I thought she got married.
Okay, so these are our LPAC results. This is our assessment by the state assessment for English learner progress. So students, when they enter school for the first time, they fill out a home language survey. And if there's any language other than English on that in any section, then students are given an initial LPAC to determine whether they are already fluent English speakers or classified as English learners. And then from then on, they take this test annually. And so we have, what is that? 27 plus 9, 36.5% of our students who are moderately developed and well-developed. And so again, this is an area for growth. You can see by grade level here where our students are falling in their proficiency levels. And then this is by school site. Again, looking at the moderately or well-developed, because once they reach this stage, then this is where we can consider looking at them holistically, how they're doing academically, to determine if they would be eligible for reclassification as fluent English speakers. And again, Santa Rita here, we have 22% in that category out of 436 English learners. So again, it's another area where we're concentrating at Santa Rita.
Does this apply to all our students across the board, like special education, all of that? Like
If they're an English learner, yeah.
we would test them the same way? Is the testing exactly the same for special education?
There's an alternative LPAC, but it's for students who, even with accommodations, wouldn't be able to access the general summative LPAC. So there's an alternative. And so there's this is the same for our other state testing as well. There's a list of accommodations. Mel can speak to this. That's her department, but
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to it. So mostly we look at that alternative for our mod severe students. So again, just perspective, we just have a handful of students at in our mod severe SDC programs. So, and they go through during the IEP process, they go through a pretty significant questionnaire that kind of pushes the team. Is it appropriate to take this alternative assessment?
Okay.
but that's also where they would designate any of those accommodations or supports for the general one.
Yeah,
that's
there's a
great question.
specific page in the IEP that goes through, here's the embedded accommodations, here's the additional accommodations we can provide. I have been working with our team because when I first got here, we were throwing like scribe, right? And so a big conversation is we'll have our students used that before getting to the test. So we've been doing quite a bit of training during our all sped PLCs this year around those pieces.
Great question. Okay, and this is the longitudinal analysis again, going back to 2018 on the far left of this bigger area to 2023, where we are 1 year ago again, because our LPACs are still being scored at this point for this year.
How much of this is influenced by generational changes in socioeconomic? I'm getting a little confused a little bit because I'm thinking LPAC.
I don't know.
I'd say just off the cuff, it's combination, but those are two areas that you can't put one to the side right now because our demographic is changing and it changed over COVID. We saw in our area with an agricultural base and those things as different industries shifted during lockdown of COVID and all of those pieces. We had families who moved out, some who were just making their way back to us. And so our overall population had a shift, right? And then those other factors of how has that impacted our student demographic over time, as well as just the general education effects of COVID. It's commingled, I think, at this point for
I'm
us.
seeing that
Yeah.
trend, and I see a little pause.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I really can't believe it's that much learning loss per se. I'm just wondering, is it more of population that's changing? Or is it, I'm not just.
Yeah. So our demographic hasn't greatly changed, like our number, if we're looking by race and ethnicity, that's been pretty stable. So what I would say is that if you look on paper, it looks like there's been a change, but I think we've gotten better at identifying our students. So we brought our community liaisons on. We saw this big increase in our, for example, our students who are being identified as homeless, or our students who are identified as being socioeconomically disadvantaged. Those students have been here in the district. They're not new to the district. They've just now been identified appropriately. So you may see that number shift a little bit, but when I look at like, when did those students enter the district? They've been here since kindergarten. Now they're 8th graders. Our community liaisons identified them in 6th grade or 5th grade. So now they're falling into that category, but they've always been here. So I think that, like Melissa shared, there's no way of separating it, right? We have, again, it's a great dissertation research. The impacts of the pandemic and learning loss are not just related to our students. They're related to our educators. They're related to our families. They're related to our community. And all of those pieces, we're not anywhere close to have coming back from all of those parts. And so I think they're all commingled. So I think, the next several years, we're going to see an up and down as we start to figure out what the new stabilization is and go from there. I think it's going to be, yeah. Yeah,
And
I think we're
as I have CASP test hatred, I also have LPAC test hatred. In terms of, it used to be more paper and pencil based, and now it's really technology based. So you're also judging somebody's ability to use technology as well as their ability to do the other things. And especially that's more damaging the younger you are, and I think eventually it's going to get better. But I don't think that we're there yet in terms of how the extent to which this is a good metric of what's actually happening with the students. I do like that they moved the testing to the spring. That was a state change that was to the better. So sometimes it takes a long time to get change, but you get some.
The only thing I was going to add is I think with LPAC, kind of listening to Sarah, and again, coming from the bilingual educator world, the reality is if we gave this test to every student, regardless of language designation, our results would look very similar. And so we know that our students, even if they're designated as English only, struggle in the same way with language acquisition, right? And when you looked at the slide that Becky had before around grade level, we are going to see less students, or maybe it was after, less students proficient, showing that growth at the earlier levels because they're just coming into acquiring English. And it's okay. Like part of what I want to say, this is my advocacy for families a little bit. It's okay. Like having strong primary language skills as a young learner is a strength. We want them to come in with those really strong foundational skills in their primary language. They're going to learn English better in that space. So for our families, when we're looking at kind of like those grade levels and we see lower LPAC scores initially in kinder, first, second, I want to see growth. But it's okay, especially if they have that strong primary language.
I want to give one real life recent example. So as we were kind of divvying up the ed services pieces, I served as test coordinator for the district. And so one of our academic coaches or EL specialists called and said, I just had a student, they're brand new. We have 12 school days left. Do I need to give them the initial and then give them the summative? And the
ELA.
L and the SBAC.
ELA SBAC.
I said, let me call the state because that seems like a lot. And yeah, we did. Math, it's the math. So we had to give the student the initial, and if they were designated as EL, we needed to turn around and give them the LPAC summative, even though this is a newcomer at
And they've
at
had
that
no
grade level.
instruction in between.
No instruction in a matter of a couple of days. And yes, they did have to take the math assessment. The state did let us know that if we weren't finished in the 12 days, we could go into June up until the end of the testing window if we needed that. And so there's a little bit of that kind of piece in it. So as Summer was saying, I think I gave that example because that's a real clear thing that skews data, as well as you do see our newcomers in here as well, right? And they may register in January 1st and they're turning around and taking the summative LPAC in February. So
Are we still seeing like a gradual student newcomers still kind of?
Yes, up to, we had probably 20 within the last month of school.
I just want to caveat though, like what we consider a newcomer. It doesn't necessarily mean they're new. Like we have a lot of students who are coming in, people are saying newcomers. They may not be new to the country overall. Like we have some students who I'll hear staff say, oh, we have this big group of newcomers. And when we look, they're not necessarily new to the country, but they're new to English. And so that's, I think it's yeah, Becky's answering your question. Yes, we've had an influx of newcomers, new to the country, first time in the country, new learners. But we often say newcomers referring to students who are coming in with no English language, and it gets mixed up. And so
Does that kind of happen because they didn't attend school or because of their age, or?
It could just be that the home primarily spoke Spanish. And so the student came in with no English language, right? And so a lot of times teachers will say, oh, I have a newcomer, right? So maybe they could even be a third grader. They could be a third grader who just has only had Spanish. And so they'll refer, sometimes I'll hear like they're a newcomer and we look and they've been here for a period of time. They've been in the country for a period of time. Lots of different reasons why, but their language base is really, really low.
It's a good thing to clarify because in the world of English language proficiency and education, when we talk about newcomers, it is a short amount of time engaging with the English language in an educational setting, right? It doesn't mean they're just registering today because, as Summer said, they may have been at another school the previous 6 months. And so it has to do instead with how long they've been accessing English as an instruction. Yeah.
Is there a time frame or a cutoff, like for us to be able to take in any student, or like we would be, so like,
I
so-
told the kindergartner the day before the last day of school,
oh, wow.
the Wednesday. So she went to one day in kindergarten.
Okay, okay. Well, and this is true to, like, let's say someone coming from a different country and being, you know, English that for, you know, first time, we would still take them in, let's say like, I don't know, you said, I'm asking because you said the last month we had so many. Like, let's say we would be taking, what if those students were 8th graders, would we take them in too? Okay.
Jacob asked a question many meetings ago that I was thinking about while we were talking about this was advocacy and things to advocate for at the state level. They used to do a thing when it was our own state testing and we weren't involved nationally where they took a picture of your student body in October, and those were the children whose test scores counted against you or for you in when we did the testing in April or May, the idea that you'd had them at least 6 months, and the other kids took the test. So you had scores for those children to be able to give to their parents, but they didn't count towards your what your district was doing. Instituting something like that again at the state level, I think would be more equitable towards the schools and the teachers in terms of what was actually happening, as opposed to counting a score of somebody who walked in 20 minutes ago, who literally coming from another country. Yeah, so just being able to say, hey, they were here from October to April, we can have some accountability for what happened during that time, to me makes more sense than they just got here yesterday.
All right, so these are our English learners and how they have performed on the ELA SBAC test. And so we can see there is somewhat of a gap here between all students and English learners. If you look at this graph, this one is flipped because what we know is students who are reclassified as fluent English proficient outperform even our English only students. So here our RFEP students are scoring above the majority of students in our
Wow.
district.
That's the benefit of multi-language learning.
Yes.
Because the extra
It
services,
is.
extra help, extra.
Your ability to acquire knowledge, skills, to access literacy, it's just stronger. I mean, it's the foundation of the benefit.
It's related to the reason that dual language immersion children who've been in that program
Right.
from by the time they get to 8th grade outperform even children who've been in English only, even if they were English dominant to start out
Really?
with. Yes.
Mhm. And then the same thing for math. The math test on the SBAC really is very language heavy. And so it's interesting that new students are excused from the English part of SBAC, but not math. So you see the same trend here where our RFEP students are outperforming the majority of students, but you can see a gap here when students are still classified as English learners and not proficient yet. All right, so our LCAP actions, more condensed here for goal 3 because so much is covered in 1 and 2 that crosses over to this. But you'll see 3.1 is focused on Santa Rita Elementary and John Gutierrez Middle School because of their reds on the dashboard for English learners. And then this is looking at English ELD for all of our English learners.
All right. And then you kind of saw on that beginning slide, because we don't have 12 hours, which it would take us to go through everything. We really wanted to focus in on ELA, ELD, math, and then you're going to see us focus in on school climate. So we're going to just kind of flip through the other sides. I'll pause at the questions that we have. And then if there's any additional questions, the team is here. We will present data later. It's just not today because we don't have time. So next, we're really looking at educational technology. And what we looked at is how do we integrate advanced instructional technology to increase our learning outcomes overall? And the essential question that we asked as we worked to create those goals was really around what technology should be prioritized to enhance educational outcomes across our district. And Krisha has done a ton of work at really looking at all that we have, because it's really easy to click buy, right? But how are we utilizing it and what's its purpose? And so in creating the LCAP for this year, we were able to sit together, look through all of those tools and really map out, not only is it needed, but how would it be utilized? This is our LCAP goal 4, and the action associated with that is enhancing student achievement, engagement and achievement through the use of instructional technology. Next area is special education. I am going to show you one piece of data in here because it's one of the areas of focus because it was an area of the red, just kind of as you know. So when we were looking at creating our goal around special education and serving our special education students, we really looked at engagement and equity for our SPED students. And so we asked ourselves, what steps can we take to ensure that special education students are fully engaged and have equitable access to learning? And then how do we monitor and support academic success and the socio-emotional needs of our special education students? I'm going to give Melanie a second to talk about our Teach Town curriculum that's been implemented.
I've been talking about this in our board meetings and in the Friday letter too, but I'll just mention that we've already provided 3 kind of afternoons of training for our special day teachers as well as the para educators in those classrooms. We are utilizing it during our ESY summer school program, and I'm just beyond happy about how well it's going. There's a lot of interactive components of it. It's digital as well as hardcore books. So yeah, when I was getting the opportunity to unwrap everything and just seeing the leveled readers and how they're all very similar and not necessarily identifying our struggling readers, I was very excited to have the opportunity to have this curriculum. And again, this is for our mod severe special day classes that haven't had curriculum in the past. So, you know, they're not kind of pulling different things and doing teacher pay teacher. They have like a full blown curriculum that's tied to those Common Core standards. So very excited about it.
So the piece of data that I want to share that kind of we'll talk about it more in the climate, but I felt like it needed to come here to really draw this out is that one of our areas in the red and one of our areas of disproportionality in suspension rates is of our special education students. And so if you look here, it's kind of at the top, but you'll see it on there. Overall, let me look at it on mine, so I'll do it. So SPED total suspensions at Santa Rita. So there were 30 total suspensions at Santa Rita Elementary School. In that school itself. 19 of those suspensions were students who have an IEP. Now, what I want to say is that represents, this number is important, 4 students. So there were 4 students, but those 4 students were suspended 19 times. That means that 63% of the suspensions were special education students. When we look at McKinnon, there were 20 suspensions overall. 12 of those were students who had an IEP representing 8 students. So 8 students, total of 12 suspensions, representing 60% of the suspensions being of special education students. La Jolla, 32% of the suspensions were special education students. New Republic, 0.08. They had a really low suspension rate overall. JGMS, 30% were special education students, and GVMS, 30% were special education students. These numbers are extreme. We want a 3% or lower. I'm on a 0%, but a 3% or lower suspension rate. So we can see why we're in the red and where that disproportionality lies.
And just a quick, somebody is classified special education if the IEP, right?
An IEP.
So what are certain types of IEPs that sometimes people will have? Because I think sometimes even when people talk to me, I think there might be like a little bit of misconception what special ed means.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times I think they think more of the severe to
Absolutely.
you know, but I think it's a bigger category that's there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's the 13 areas of eligibility,
Sure.
right? I do think it's interesting when I look at this data, right? Because our special day classes, right, that are the smaller ones where typically our more severe student populations are at New Republic and McKinnon Elementary, whereas New Republic has a very low rate. So, right, I've been really interpreting this data of like, how do we shift this? I think an important part to note too is we have been qualifying students at a very high rate this last year or two after COVID, right? Child find, trying to identify students that do have those disabilities, and then just the need. So I know at Santa Rita, we've qualified, you know, students with pretty significant behaviors throughout this last school year.
And maybe what we could do as a future workshop is maybe dive into what special education implies, because I think really good for the public. I know oftentimes when I speak to different people across the state, there's a little bit of misconception, like who's in that category.
People think of special ed as mod severe. That's just where
Yeah.
your mind goes. You don't think about a typical student who has a speech delay, right? And that student's going to qualify in this number. I think what's important to note about this Santa Rita group specifically is that as soon as a student qualifies for special ed, they're moving over to that category. Some of these students at the time of suspension were not on an IEP yet, right? So yeah, so let's talk about student A. Student A comes in, student has behaviors, student is suspended. In that process, the student is being assessed under child find to determine, is there a disability that's contributing to this behavior? Once that student qualifies, yes, that student now has an IEP. For the state, all of these suspensions are registered as being contributed to a student who has a special need, right, with an IEP. Because at the point that you're assessing, so an easy way to think about it is if you suspect a disability, the state treats it as if the student has a disability until we say they don't. So if this student was assessed, they did not qualify for an IEP, these would not count as a student with a disability, right? But in the process, in the time under child find, if we suspect there's a disability, we treat as if there is a disability. Right?
I just want to really quickly just say something on this. I think it's really important that you mention that because like you guys say, you know, we have this scope, but even there, I think regardless, these numbers are still alarming. And regardless, it's something that as a parent, you know, I would want to like, okay, like you said, how are we gonna help these students?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't mean that they need to be mod severe. They're obviously qualified for a reason.
Right.
Okay, we need to find a solution because regardless, these numbers need to go down. Because as somebody from the public view, a parent seeing this, be like, well, what's going on in that district? You know, why is it that these kids have why are they not? There's something there. So I think that this is something definitely like what Jacob said. I would also like to see it come back because definitely is something that we definitely need to look into.
And I'm going to show you other suspension data. You're going to feel bad about that too.
I did want to say something that's kind of weirdly positive about this data. When I came to this district as a board member, we were doing a bunch of stuff that was not legal in terms of suspensions. In other words, we were sending somebody home because they were having a bad day and not marking it as a suspension. Legally, you just took that child's access to curriculum away. That is a suspension.
Yeah.
So we had data that looked good, but did not accurately reflect what was going on at all.
Sarah, because
so
administrators don't love that part of my job where I'm like, that's a suspension. Like,
you know, so as soon as you've taken the child away from their learning environment and that's a suspension. So yes, we need to fix this, but you know how when you clean your house, you have to make it look worse before it looks better. This is the looking worse before it looks better, as opposed to the pretending that it wasn't happening, which is what we used to have.
Yeah, I agree. This is okay. And I think again, to put in place, like that's why we brought to you at the last board meeting that restorative practice lead who's going to be supporting across and 2 behavior aides that are going to be supporting in conjunction with special education, because like I said, I'm going to show you some more data and we're not going to love it either. But so, I mean, again, what we know we can address, right? So we know this is a challenge, we can address it. So this is in our LCAP action 5.1 to 5.4. And again, you'll see here, it's really about enhancing behavioral support, kind of speaking to what you just said, enhancing for, in special education, our hiring of additional paraprofessionals to help provide that support, looking at those educational outcomes, and then increasing our achievement. And that's where Teach Town really comes in. Number 6, I think it's still me. I know, I can't remember. Rigorous instruction. So it's really looking at enhancing the academic success for college and career readiness, right? A lot of times because we're an elementary district, we don't think about the fact that when they leave us, they're only 4 short years away from going out into the real world. I was watching a comedian the other night and he was talking about his 20-year-old son. And he's like, I just keep telling my friends, like, he's not ready. Like, I can't send him out there. Right. And you know, I think about that every time I watch these 8th graders promote, like, whew, 4 years. There's a lot of questions here because this goal really encompasses a lot of areas. It encompasses how we are providing professional development to increase the rigor of the instruction that we're providing. It focuses on our school-wide and district-wide implementation of AVID. we really looked at how do we keep consistency of the educational access that our students have. We know that the disruption with substitute teachers is lending itself towards that learning gap. So if we have a pool of substitute teachers who are part of our day-to-day, who are in our training, who understand our curriculum, who know the scope and sequence, and know the students, when a teacher is out for whatever reason, be that illness, professional development, mental health day, that teacher can easily step in and continue the educational continuity for those students. And then we looked at our reduction in class size, keeping those class sizes at 24 and 29. Our actions that contributed to that are 6.1 to 6.4, offering rigorous instruction to specifically our unduplicated students. Again, that's our English language learner, our low socioeconomic students, our Hispanic students, our homeless students, and our foster youth. At AVID across the district, keeping that continuous pool of substitute teachers and reducing that class size. Our next area really focused on attendance and chronic absenteeism. We looked at how do we improve student attendance specifically by addressing parental involvement through expanded communications. So how do we get at the root of why students aren't attending school? And we looked at what can we do to increase parent involvement in their child's education? And then how do we use those communication channels to improve support for our families? These are our LCAP actions 7.1 through 7.3. Again, other meetings will have more data for you, not enough time. In goal 7, we looked at those specific areas on the dashboard. We're in the red. So for the all SPED and white students at New Republic, white students at La Jolla, and Asian and white students district-wide. And then the areas that we talked about. 7.3 is really important. It goes back to what we were talking about in our earlier conversation. We know that fostering a positive school climate is going to increase our student attendance rates. And that leads to what I'm going to talk about next. So looking at school safety and student mental health. As we really work towards reframing and refining this goal, we really looked at it's not just provisions of mental health, but it's really creating nurturing spaces where our students can feel included, they feel safe, and they feel involved. And so we looked at how do we provide comprehensive mental health and crisis intervention for our students to ensure their well-being. We looked at targeted interventions and restorative practices to reduce our suspension rates, especially in those areas identified on our dashboard. And we looked at what comprehensive measures can we put into place to cultivate a safe and secure learning environment, not just for our students, but for our staff as well, right? If our staff are feeling well, then our students are going to learn better. This is where that other piece of suspension data that we're also not going to like comes in. So when we look at suspension rates overall as a district, we had this year 203 suspensions, which represents 6% of our student body. Again, we're going to be in the red and the orange, depending on site, on the dashboard this coming year. The number's too high. It needs to be lower than 6%. When we look by site, and again, this is looking at all students, which means it includes those special education students that we talked about. So Santa Rita itself had 30 suspensions, 5%. McKinnon 20 suspensions, 5%, 28.5. You can see those percentages there. What'll stand out to you is this Gavilan View suspension rate. It's an outlier, right? It draws my attention there. We see 5%, 1%, and then all of a sudden we see this 16%. Again, this is why we're choosing to house our restorative practice lead at Gavilan View, even though the person will serve district-wide. We know that we need to provide targeted support in that space.
And that's not students, sometimes there's multiple suspensions by the same student?
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
So 91 total suspensions, that's not 91 students. And you kind of saw that in that other number.
Sure, that's why I
You
asked
see a
to
little bit there.
clarify.
Mhm. Now, I will say that for Gavilan View itself, students suspended multiple times. It's not super high. So I saw a group of 6 students have multiple suspensions, but a lot of them were one-time suspensions. This is actions 8.1 to 8.3. And those focus around enhancing student well-being, really focused on mental health, bullying prevention, and crisis intervention, and then reducing disproportionality in suspension rates, and then cultivating that safe and secure learning environment for our students.
I'll talk about goal 9, which is our staff recruitment and retention. An area of focus again, because we know that when we have consistency in our staff, that is a benefit to our students. And so we want to strengthen our recruitment and retention for student success. And we considered how we design and implement an onboarding program that effectively addresses the needs of new hires and promotes a sense of belonging. And that's an area that we're focusing on as a district and at each school site as we've worked through our people bench data this year. And then what strategies and practices can we integrate into our ongoing support training and recognition systems so that staff feel valued, engaged, and motivated. So the goal that we have here is pretty straightforward. Comprehensive onboarding and staff retention program. We want to develop that. And I'm going to pass this back to Summer.
For New Republic Elementary. Again, that star signifies that this is an area of disproportionality. Multiracial students, 2% suspension rate, 0.6% of our overall population. Asian student, 0.05% suspension rate, and 0.9% of our student population. So not disproportionate. Again, looking over here, this is by school. So you can see those percentages there. Santa Rita itself is 99% Hispanic, identified as 99% Hispanic. 87% of the suspensions were Hispanic students, so not disproportionate. But white students make up 0.7% of the student population, and we're 13%. So it is a area of disproportionality. I won't go through all of them. I'll draw your attention to McKinnon is 93% Hispanic, but 100% of their students suspensions were of Hispanic students. The other area of disproportionality was here at La Jolla for white students, New Republic for white students, JGMS for Hispanic students, barely, but still important to note, right? 89% of their students are identified as Hispanic, 90% of their suspensions were of Hispanic students. Again, multiracial students, same thing, disproportionality of Hispanic students at GVMS overall. These are LCAP actions 10.1 and 10.2. And again, comprehensive anti-bias, equity, and anti-racism training and support, and then empowering student voices and expanding opportunities for equity and inclusion across our district.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and pass on to the budget. And Melanie's passing out two sheets, one for the closing year 2023-24 and one for the new year, because I really want you to see the changes from one year to another one. As I mentioned on my last presentation, due to the cuts on one-time funding, the budget for the school sites going on the new year have been reduced because those funds have been expired.
Rosa, did you make this off of the new one that just came out, what they just passed, or governor?
Yeah, this is based on the May revise. Yeah, this was already budgeted on the July 1st budget. And pretty much the difference between the 2 years is that bottom table. All of that was part of the one-time funds. And also on the top table, the one that we're reducing, I think we have the in-person grant in there and one grant as well for paras that we're not going to have anymore. The LCAP changed because it used to be more discretionary funding, and now we are providing LCAP, but it's specifically for field trips and has a dollar amount per grade level per site. So we went from $1,028,724 to the new budget on the 24-25 to $439,726. And again, the main reason is due to the one-time funds. And now and also the change in the LCAP, as we're shifting now to the new year and on the upcoming years, like I mentioned before, we are going through a change of a shift of funding where it used to be more LCFF, more unrestricted. Now we're getting grants that might be for 1 year, 2 years, or ongoing like the ELOP, but are more restrictive for specific purposes and specific timelines. So something else that we added this year was also health supplies for the school sites. During the COVID years, we were ordering bulk orders because it was cheaper. And now as we're getting off the COVID, we're providing a specific site-based funding, and we're basing our dollars based on prior year expenses. So we look at how much they spend on prior years, and that's how we got an estimated amount. We're also using a rate for the unduplicated count, as we noticed that some of those sites like Santa Rita, La Jolla might have more needs than the other sites, as we get more students that might come in for a headache, maybe because they didn't have breakfast, just things like that. So they're getting a little bit more funding. We talk about the reduction of LCFF on this new year, which is $1.4 million with the shift of funding as well. Just to give you an example, prior years, we used to get a grant, the AB 602, which it was just one big grant, all of it for SPED. Now that grant has been converted into all these little sub grants under. So we have the AB 602, we have one for low incidence, we have one for students with disabilities, learning mitigation laws, we have another one just for preschool, but for SPED, and we have another SPED for early intervention. So we're getting almost the same amount of dollars, but now instead of being big one grant, they're taking the money and distributing this funding into restricted grants, not necessarily meaning that we're getting more funding. So just to give you an example of how we're going into this shift of funding, we got the ELOP grant now that it's in the future it seems like it's going to emerge with pretty similar to what the ACES program, and somehow in the future years, it seems like those programs are going to be working together. We're getting, I have a list right here that you can take a look at it. I know we talk about it when we bring these new board items to the board for approval. But for example, we got funding for EL specialists that it was board approved, I believe, on the last board meeting. So we're moving as we're going to this shift on funding, we're identifying positions that we're getting paid maybe before out of the LCAP or the unrestricted, and now moving these positions into the new restricted funding before we do cuts or we hire new staff. We're always looking into what do we have right now, because we're also looking in the future that we recognize that we have to make those cuts in the future. So we're working with the funding that we have, but we're also looking at areas of how do we shift, how do we move, and how do we make everything work so that we don't have to go into these maybe cuts, huge cuts in the near future. So going to the, oh, I have a control. You have control. I have control. So just going over again, this year we are getting a LCFF reduction of $1.4 million. This is due to the negative 3% COLA. Budget reductions for this new year, 24-25. Also, this is due to the one-time funds that we don't have. If we don't do any cuts, let's say if we keep everything as how it is and the state says this is going to be your COLA, the 1.07, and we don't do anything about it, we're looking at the following year or unrestricted salaries to benefits, it's going to look at the 90.2%, which we're coming from the county office, and when we're reviewing the budgets, that's already a red flag. We have to be on the 80%. So this right now, looking at the next year following, it tells me that there are necessary changes that we have to do this year. So that starting fresh on the following year, 25-25, we don't end up in the 90% and we don't end up with the county saying, hey, you're not going to be able to meet your minimum reserves. So it's really important that in this year, 24-25, we work as much on trying to work with that shift of funding as much as we can, use the resources that we have, and identifying areas for savings as well. Or even a better scenario is that we get more funding, right? But we don't know. That will be great. Another important grant that it's helping us this year a lot, because there were some expenditures, some positions that we were not able to maintain in the LCAP, not with the new restrictions and the areas that need to be covered. Those positions, those services, mostly mental health, the SRO, for example, got moved to this learning recovery grant, which we have budgeted for this year, but we know that it's going to end at the end of this year. So that's about $3 million that we know that we're not going to be able to have for next year, unless, again, we get another grant that it's similar or we get more LCFF funding. But as of now, we recognize and we put in the budget that we know we have to do a $2 million reduction from the unrestricted funding. And additionally, we know that this grant is ending and we're not going to be able to provide these services because the funds are not going to be there. And right below, it gives you an example, what are we paying from there? We've been paying all the Saturday school program, behavioral aids, mental health services. We have paraprofessionals that were paid under the LCAP, and because of the funding, we were almost forced to move all of that to be able to have a more balanced budget. And pretty much I talk about these two items. And
Rosa, can I ask a question real quick?
yeah.
So one of the areas that we're looking at, like with Saturday school, for example, because it came up with Madonna and I the other day, is we're looking at, because we're using it for ADA recovery too. So we're still going to calculate, like, is there a cost benefit? So for students who have been chronically absent, kind of addressing that, we can do that recovery to get back that money. But part of what we have to analyze is, like, are we getting enough back to make it justify the cost of having people work on Saturdays? And so we should have more information. And if there is a cost benefit, then we would continue to have Saturdays as ADA makeup. If not, then we would kind of determine what that looks like.
Right. Thank you, Summer. And we can do that calculation once the year closes and we have final ADA and all of that. We can look into that. But I know I started looking at it. It does. It is an expense. Right now, what's really helping us is that we were using this one-time grant that has nothing to do with the LCFF. So we're using this grant and using the resources to increase the LCFF, which is a win-win. But once we have this funding not available, are we going to be able to afford using LCFF funding to increase LCFF? That's something that we really have to analyze, because it's almost like this. If we have any revenue increase due to this, it's not going to be a lot. I'm talking about probably $50,000 or so. So something to take in consideration
Can you
when we
repeat the
move
last
forward.
part again that, so you guys were talking about increasing, but it's so short 50,000, is that what you're saying, or?
Well, we have
With
to
like Saturday
analyze.
school, yeah.
Yeah, no, the last time that I was looking at it, we were talking about $50,000 more, putting using the Saturday school program, because there is expenses, right? We have to
course, yeah.
pay teachers and yeah, custodial work and all of that. So putting all of those expenses and looking at how much money we are recuperating through the LCFF, most of the time it goes like this, right? It's almost the same. It's a benefit to the students, that's great. But if we can put in since this, right now it's great because we have the funding, right? But going to the following year, since this funding is ending, is there another funding that we can use? And so that's something that we can explore.
And what we're talking about is ELOP, right? Because we
Mhm.
can use it. The problem is that has to be a 9-hour day on Saturdays, and it's really challenging. We have to offer a 9-hour day. Kids don't have to stay for 9 hours, so it could be like summer where there's kind of a base program that goes till 12 and an expansion that goes till 4:30. But we have to offer a 9-hour day, and so weighing the cost benefit and staff benefit to that is where the challenge. But if we can offer it under ELOP and we're able to do that, then we can still use ELOP to offset ADA, but it has to be a 9-hour day.
So when you mentioned for example, the 90%, that's for the unrestricted portion of the budget, right? So
Yes.
the goal would be like if there's a grant or certain funding that gets allocated, that we would fund a position under that. So it reduces 90% to
Right,
80
and
or
that,
whatever
yeah,
the case
and
is.
that's what we've been working on. So even though we are already working on that and moving that with the changes that we have done this year in 24-25, we're still looking at a 90% on the 25-26 on the next year. So
Oh, you're
that's
still
if
looking
we
at that,
keep
yeah.
everything how we have it, we have the funding that we're projecting, we're still at the 90.2.
Okay. And you were mentioning county, you said 80% or 80s is where usually you're looking.
80%, 82, no more than 85,
85.
because that would be already, you're over 85, you're getting to that 90%. That's already like a red flag of what changes are you planning to do, or how are you planning to lower that percentage?
Sure. And how does that come into, I guess, seeing it as a red flag as far as understanding that 15% has to be spent on other stuff versus 18?
Because most of our funding comes from LCFF funding.
Yeah.
We have all these categoricals that are specifically for specific things. So most of our funding comes from LCFF. So pretty much what they're seeing is that if most of your funding comes from LCFF, no more than 85% should be spent on salaries and benefits, because you have all other, you have to pay electricity, custody, all of that, right?
Mm.
So they want to make sure that the funding that you have is enough, and you're going to have enough to pay for that. It's like when we're looking at our personal budget, if your house payment is 80% of your income, and then your house payment for some reason increased at 10% down, now you're at 90%, you only have 10% to buy food, gas, and all of that, and you're gonna be struggling. It's kind of like the same picture with the district. If you're over that 85% and you don't have that 20% to pay your contract services, your electricity, your lights, your gas, and all of it that is necessary to maintain the school, it's already like you're putting the district in a tight budget. Like you need to either reduce your spending or get more funding. And the personal level, I either need to get another side job, or I need to go to an apartment
Yeah.
to lower my
I
rent.
guess what I'm kind of asking is because like in your analysis,
Mhm.
10% of somebody's income varies from person to person. So
Right.
like if somebody makes 200,000 versus somebody makes 100,000 or 50,000, they're gonna be really tight on that 10%. Right.
Right,
So
right.
that's why I'm curious to know, like, I mean, this is the longer conversation. Is,
Mhm.
Can I,
is if
can I
the-
jump in
yeah.
for a second? Like, one, if you're spending 90% of your income on salaries, teachers you owe a contract to for a year, administrators you owe a contract to for a year, classified people still have a long
Mhm.
notification. You can't do anything, like say we have, which has happened here at Gavilan View, all the pipes at Gavilan View, explode. You have no money, you have no flexibility in terms of
Like you can't pay that. You've got to now go into like the next year to pay that. But you don't even have flexibility for the rest of the school year to say like, how can we fix it in the second half? Because you can't get rid of, all those people that you already owe a job to for a year. I think that to me, it's one of the big issues about just having all of your money tied up into people that you can't in this fiscal year. It's very difficult to make any
Adjustments,
change,
yeah.
make
I
adjustments.
guess I'm just trying to understand how that state 15% or 20% was come up with, which probably formula,
Yeah.
because obviously, yeah.
So for us, if you think about it, like, yeah, like you said, like a personal vision of if that were my budget, and you're right, depending on your job, your salary might be higher. For us, it would be like depending on where your district's at, the size of it, your LCFF is going to be bigger, but you're going to have more schools, you're going to have more staff, you're going to have all of those things. So you think about it like your operating, your general fund money that gets to us from all the sources at the state. It's coming in based on our number of students, which then creates our number of schools, right? And so a bigger district has more revenue coming in, greater expenses. That's why they just give you that guiding 80 to 85%
Sure, yeah.
works
Because it could
as
vary
a
from
good
district,
window
yeah.
for everybody.
Yeah.
Because the high school district, their budget is much bigger than ours. They have more schools, they have more students, right? And staying in that same kind of percent range across the way.
Yeah, and I'm not arguing against that. I'm just trying to understand
Yeah.
And
why
I'll-
is it
It-
80,
it
right,
is-
85 or
And
90?
I'll reframe it in,
Yeah.
I'll go back to my granite a little bit,
Yeah.
but in my granite, that 85% for us is there to ensure, it's almost the opposite idea, that 85% is to ensure that you're using at least 85% of your funding to provide direct services to students.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's a red flag the other way too.
Yeah, that's what I
Like if,
pursued.
if you're
Yeah.
below 80%, then they're looking at you like, what?
Yeah.
They
What
want
are
to
you
make-
doing?
Making
And
sure that that percentage is being utilized to provide direct support and giving you that 15 to 20% as discretionary to take care of all of those other pieces, because they know you need at least that to take care of the other pieces, but ensuring that direct services to students are taking up that 80%.
And it's right. If it's the other way, it is also a red flag. So you have to keep the balance.
Yeah.
There's when we close the books, there's the form, the CEA form that the union sometimes looks at it. And right there, when you close the books, it tells you exactly how much percentage went out of all your expenditures went directly to the classrooms. So it goes with it because most of it's salaries and benefits for
Yeah,
teachers.
I don't know why. I feel like what in the years past we were at 78 some year. I don't know if I'm remembering correctly or
The salaries make
Yeah.
When we were going through COVID and we dipped below the 80% mark coming out of it, we were at like a 79%.
Yeah, I think there was a year like that. And the main reason for that is because during that time, during COVID, a lot of the expenses, we had all these one-time funds that a lot of our expenses went to other resources. So when they're looking at this overall total district expenditures, they're taking in consideration all these one-time funds. So it might look lower, but if we didn't have that one-time funds, we would have been fine. So it's just depending on the funding that we get. It's really important because the main reason why this is happening, it's because of revenues coming low. If our revenue would stay even the same and we keep the same, and even though we have, inflation and all of that, we wouldn't be at the 90%. But the main reason for this is that our funding, it's lower.
Got it.
And also another factor is that our enrollment is also lower. So like Melissa said, if we were on increased enrollment, then great, we're going to get more funding and things. But or enrollment is low or revenue is low, and we have to make
And
adjustments.
salary and benefits increased this year.
yeah.
Right.
because those ones you have
We have
contracted
inflation.
already. so
Right.
they're
And
there.
going to what Summer said in terms of wanting it to touch the student, sometimes you'll hear right side, wrong side. And right side means it's an aide who's directly helping a child. That would be or wrong side would be like you bought a copy machine for the district office. It's not technically wrong, but just in terms of trying to prioritize that the money gets as close to the kids as possible.
Thank you. So yeah, we talk about the $2 million reduction that we need to do. Again, trying to keep as much as updated with the budget. They usually sign the budget after July 1st. So as soon as they provide more information, if there's any big changes that we need to do, then I come back and provide the 45-day budget revision with the changes. If no changes, this July 1st budget stays until first interim, unless there's any other big changes that I'm not gonna be surprised if they do, because there has been a lot of changes in the middle of the year, at the ending of the year, and it's just been a little bit crazy, but we're
I
trying
got
to
a
work
press release
everything.
this morning that CSBA says that they're going to sue based on the budget that just went through the legislature. That
Yeah, there's
So-
a lot of controversy. That's all from my end. Thanks. Oh, I do? No.
Questions?
Yeah. that was-
Made it on time.
I got it done.
Well, for me, thank you, ladies, all the team always for showing up. These are very important workshops, for us to know what's going on. Like I mentioned the other time with the budget, it is, the state, while that plays into part, and hopefully we get more funding, hopefully whatnot, but fortunately, there might have to be things that we'll have to do and take care of when we have to take care of. But also for any parents that might be watching, I think it's very important that I know that when I started at Santa Rita at the school site council, and I remember going in there and seeing these numbers and seeing like a 16%. And I was like, wait, what? My child comes here and what are we, what is these numbers? But obviously we want to get those numbers up high, but to take into consideration all of this other stuff, like, hey, a kid just came from another country a month ago, and guess what? He's on that board too. You know what I mean? Like there's so many moving parts, like right now where Sarah just told me, like suspension. I was not aware that suspension is called for. You're sending this kid home automatically. It's not necessarily, he did something horribly, but he's having a behavioral issue that has to be sent automatically a suspension, and we weren't doing that before. So there's a lot of moving pieces, and I just think it's very important for parents to know that and know that our involvement is so important.
Yes.
Because a lot of parents just think like, well, what are they doing in school? What are they teaching them? Like all of these different things. And it's like, we need to be part of it and on board, because this is how it's going to make our district, be better and grow and all that. So, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, because I know that as a parent, not knowing so much stuff, you see things and you get alarmed and you're like, wait, my child's going to this, so there's a lot of things. And we're here to help and reach out and stuff like that if you guys ever have questions. But that's all.
And we can do like some mini workshop time attached to like board agendas. Like we want to bring back, like, let's do a discussion around what are the 13 qualifying areas for special education and what does that process look like, right? We can bring that in as part of a regular board night, and that's a discussion item that we add, and kind of do some mini workshops along the way, because we usually do our summer workshop where we talk about like this kind of stuff in our action plan, and then a winter workshop where we're looking at mid-year progress and student data. So we can maybe embed some of those things along the way and in some board meetings.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah. How did the school sites do as far as spending their money this year compared to?
Good question.
So just so the public knows, what you were giving in the graphs was each school site is allocated a certain amount of money for.
So I can't really give you actuals right now
You know, of course,
because
yeah.
the schools just closed and we're still getting invoices and trying to pay those out. So I'll have more accurate information
Okay.
after maybe around July, once those invoices are paid out. We tried to work with the sites. I can tell you there was money left that didn't get spent. And that's a district savings. So it's not a bad thing, I guess. It's a
Yeah,
district savings.
it's
We'll
a good
use the
savings
next
for a
year.
budget, but a bad thing for the school site, because
Yeah.
you could have used it for
They could have used it.
for
yeah.
something else at the site.
And
So.
I'll say Rosa leaned on them really heavy as she set the deadline, and then call me and we can talk through what you're looking at doing. And a lot of our principals did.
Did.
They were
We
like,
had
I have this over
meetings.
here. Can I, So.
Some sites are really good at reaching out and saying, hey, I need an extension, I need to get this done, or what can I use this funding with? And I did receive those emails and we did provide support as much as we can. So we did our best, but
Yeah, no, I
there was
appreciate that. No,
so
I mean,
funding
it's,
left on the
there's
table,
only so
yes.
much you can do, especially if you put it out there. And it looks like, especially the last 2 years, there's been more of a intentional effort to like, hey,
Yes.
like reach out to us. We're here to support you. Don't feel bad if you're spending the money, because I know you mentioned that's a concern in the back. Yeah, like, oh, if I spend it, they're gonna think they're not gonna give me money again. So that's good that you were and the stuff that we need to hear that, because obviously when we're out there and they're like, hey, we don't have money for this or that, I'm like,
Mhm.
well,
And
you're-
I'll just say, in my time at the schools, our schools are not lacking for anything. I would
Yes.
love to be a teacher in the Santa Rita Union School District in 2024. Like, our classrooms are stocked, our cabinets
Mhm.
are stocked, the
Yes.
supply rooms are stocked. Our music rooms are overflowing. Our-
Yes.
there is copy paper galore. I grew up in the time of famine, right? In schools where we got one packet of markers and made it last all year and one case of paper. So yeah, we are not. there is
Wow.
not- I mean, we always want more, right? That's who we are as educators, or like, but we are, our, there is abundance among
Right,
us. So.
there is, and just imagine going from a $1 million that we provided to all the sites on the, this last years during COVID, and now reducing that to more than half. I'm sure that this new budget, they're gonna spend every penny. And sometimes they have all this funding, and as a district-wide as well, we had the COVID funds. I mean, we're talking about $4.3 million that we don't have. So besides them having their school site fund, there was funds that, hey, we have this, we're gonna do this as a district, so they didn't have the need to spend their funds. They're always looking out, what can I get from the district? And they're always asking, and I look at the budget and I'm like, you have funding in there.
which is ironic, because it comes back to the district anyways, because they didn't spend it. It's like,
Yeah, so,
Yeah, and one of the guiding things, like, because what Rosa did, a lot of CBOs didn't, right? Which was, I'm going to infuse your site budget with these one-time funds, because it is your chance to get things that will last beyond the expiration date of the one-time dollars, right? So put those things in place in classrooms that kids will use right now, they'll use next year, it'll still be good the following year. And our sites have done that in the last few years, but because if we had left it all and just sheltered it all at the district, I can't anticipate what each school site needs as much as they can, right? In the ground, where teachers are like, this is my chance to flesh out my classroom library. This is my chance to get these things for my kindergarten classroom and those things. And so the encouragement that they did was around a lot of that, because we knew the expiration date. We knew when each one was drying up. And so
correct.
that's a good effort on that. And our sites have done overall a good job at being like, yes, I put these things in the cabinet. They're still good next year. We're going to bring them out, and we use the one-time fund. So
Right.
I know a lot of CBOs didn't do that to the level that Rosa did. So
bless you.
And the money that we took back, that was LCAP funding, that was going to the sites, just to be clear, like, it's specifically still designated for that site work, but we're just designating it from here, right? So it's still going to be used for professional development. It's still going to be used to provide supplies and things that students need. We're just kind of delineating it from here, just why we're here. Right, because of the accountability. But the other point that may come up, and you guys may hear about it, just so we'll talk about it, is the field trips, right? So one of the things that was happening is we were funding field trips, but there wasn't equity in it. So one site was spending $40,000 on transportation and field trips, and one site was spending $4,000, right? And we really wanted to create some equity in that. So we allocated funds, that's what Rosa was talking about, from the LCAP for sites. And it's a set amount per grade level. It's a reasonable, we took the average, what is kind of an average amount that was spent, and allocated that. That means that some of the sites that were taking the $40,000 worth of field trips either are going to have to modify or supplement that in other ways. So, they're getting $9,000 to do those field trips. That's there. If it's more than that, it is going to have to be supplemented in other ways. And that is a change. But that's about equity. We want to make sure that everybody has access, and that we're not, overspending in one area and then depriving others.
Yeah, and I think the last thing is it'll be interesting to see now that the LCAP has changed and there's more targeted resources, how we'll see that next summer and see how that kind of plays out and stuff. So hopefully for the huge positive gains. Yeah.
And I know you're already doing this, but just regards field trips, because it's a specific piece of my heart, having conversations with principals who then have conversations with teachers about going on them and using the money, because I know there are people like, it's a lot of work. It is a lot of work. I hate it every single time, and I always do it because our children deserve to have these opportunities. And I also feel like sometimes when you take the kids, the families hear about it and then go, which doesn't happen if the kids don't get the first experience.
Shoot, I forgot. So any final questions? Forgot I'm running the meeting and Neil's not here. Okay, with that, thank you, everybody. Can I get a motion to adjourn at 12:16?
Motion to adjourn.
A second.
Second.
Okay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion 4-0.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for their Saturday or